My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I learned exactly where I stood in my parents' hearts from a hospital bed with a broken body and an empty crib waiting at home, just 6 weeks before. I had given birth to my son Noah. He was healthy, perfect, and the only thing I thought about every second of every day. Then one rainy Tuesday evening, a speeding pickup truck ignored a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my car while I was driving home from work. I don't remember the impact. I remember waking up, 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, a collapsed lung, machines beeping beside me, and one terrifying question that hit me harder than the crash itself. Where's my baby? My husband, Ryan, was halfway across the country on a business trip. The earliest flight home wouldn't land for another 6 hours. Our babysitter had already left. Someone needed to stay with Noah immediately. My mother lived less than 20 minutes from the hospital. She said no, not because she was sick, not because she couldn't drive, not because she was taking care of someone else. She simply told my husband, "Emily always figures things out." Then she hung up. That sentence should have shattered me. Instead, I'd changed everything. Because while I lay in that hospital bed trying to breathe through broken ribs, I made one decision that quietly ended 12 years of secrets my family thought I'd never uncover. What happened over the next 3 hours destroyed every lie my parents had spent decades building. But that wasn't the part that finally broke them. The part that broke them walked into my hospital room carrying an old leather briefcase that looked older than I was. My grandfather. He closed the door behind him, placed the case on the foot of my bed, looked me straight in the eyes, and said 6 words I'll never forget. "I think it's finally time you knew." Inside that briefcase wasn't just paperwork. It was proof that my parents had been lying to me, proof that my entire family had been living off sacrifices I never realized I'd been making, and proof that my grandmother had discovered the truth long before she died. By the time that briefcase was open in front of my entire family a week later, no amount of tears, excuses, or apologies could save the people who had abandoned my newborn son when I needed them most. The emergency room was strangely quiet after midnight. Most people imagine hospitals as loud, chaotic places. But that night all I could hear was the steady rhythm of heart monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses moving through the hallway. Every breath reminded me of the cracked ribs beneath the bandages wrapped around my chest. My phone rested on the tray beside my bed. Ryan called again. "They found someone from an emergency childcare service," he said, his voice shaking with exhaustion. "She'll be there in about 30 minutes. Noah won't be alone." Only then did I close my eyes for a second, not because I felt safe, because my son finally was. The nurse checking my smiled gently. "Family coming to stay with you tonight?" I forced a small smile. "No," she hesitated. "I'm sorry." "So am I." That was the end of the conversation. People expect heartbreak to arrive like an explosion. Mine arrived quietly. It settled into the room like fog. I kept replaying one sentence over and over. "Emily always figures things out." My mother had said those words so casually that Ryan almost didn't repeat them. But I knew exactly what they meant. They weren't describing me. They were excusing themselves. Looking back now, I realized that sentence had been the foundation of my entire childhood. I was always the dependable one. If my younger brother, Jake, forgot to pay rent, I covered it. If dad needed help with bills, I sent money. If mom wanted someone to organize holidays, doctor's appointments, birthdays, or family emergencies, she called me. Everyone praised me for being responsible. What they never admitted was that responsibility had quietly become obligation. By the time I turned 32, I had stopped asking whether something was fair. I simply handled it. Ryan noticed long before I did. More than once he'd ask, "Why are we always the ones solving everyone else's problems?" I always gave him the same answer. "Because we're able to." I thought generosity made families stronger. I didn't understand that generosity without boundaries teaches people to expect your sacrifice. The ceiling above my hospital bed blurred as another wave of pain. Medication drifted through my body. For the first time in years, there was nothing I could fix. I couldn't leave the hospital. I couldn't drive home. I couldn't hold my baby. I couldn't protect him. And somehow, that helplessness peeled away every excuse I had spent years making for the people who claimed to love me. Just after 1 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ryan. It was Grandpa. Walter. The message was only 4 words. I'm on my way. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My grandfather lived nearly 2 hours away. No questions. No excuses. No hesitation. He simply got in his truck. I had no idea that by sunrise, he would bring with him the truth my family had spent years trying to keep buried. Grandpa Walter arrived just before sunrise. He looked older than I remembered. The gray in his hair had almost turned completely white, and the deep lines around his eyes seemed heavier than they had at Christmas. Yet the moment he stepped into my room, I felt calmer than I had all night. He didn't rush to hug me. He didn't ask 100 questions. He simply walked over, rested a weathered hand on my shoulder, and quietly said, "I'm glad you're still here." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. Ryan finally arrived an hour later, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The first thing he did was hand me a picture of Noah asleep in the emergency caregiver's arms. Our little guy never even knew we were panicking, he said, with a tired smile. I stared at that photo until my vision blurred, not because I was crying, because I couldn't stop thinking about how close my son had come to being completely alone. Grandpa noticed. He pulled his chair closer. "Ryan told me your mother couldn't make it." I gave a short laugh. "She said she was busy." He nodded slowly, as though the answer disappointed him, but didn't surprise him. "I wish I could say that's unlike her." I looked up. "What does that mean?" He studied me for a long moment before answering. "When people spend years putting one child first, they eventually stop noticing they're doing it." His words landed harder than I expected. Growing up, my younger brother Ethan had always seemed to need more. He struggled in school. He quit jobs every few months whenever he got into financial trouble. My parents insisted he just needed one more chance. I believed them. Every birthday, I received practical gifts: a sweater, kitchen supplies, a savings bond. Ethan got dirt bikes, gaming systems, expensive vacations, and somehow still managed to borrow money before the month ended. Nobody ever called it favoritism. They called it helping. I never argued. I had built a good career as a financial consultant, owned a comfortable home with Ryan, and lived carefully within our means. Compared to Ethan, I looked like the successful child. So I convinced myself I didn't need anything from my parents except their love. The problem was, love slowly turned into expectations. Every family dinner ended with someone asking if I could help. Could I review Dad's insurance papers? Could I lend Ethan money until payday? Could I cover Mom's credit card? Just this once. Each request sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they became my normal. Ryan had warned me more than once. "One day they'll expect you to carry everything." I always laughed it off. Their family. Now, lying in a hospital bed after nearly losing my life, I replayed those conversations in my head. Maybe Ryan hadn't been pessimistic. Maybe he'd simply seen something I refused to see. Grandpa stood and walked toward the window, watching the first light of morning spread across the parking lot. Without turning around, he spoke quietly. "Emily, there's something about your parents I've wanted to tell you for years." He paused. "But before I say a word, I need you to answer one question." I swallowed. "What question?" He slowly turned to face me. "If the truth changes how you see your family forever, are you ready to hear it?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked toward the small photo Ryan had taped to the cabinet beside my bed. It was a picture of Noah wrapped in a blue blanket, sleeping peacefully with one tiny hand resting against his cheek. That little boy deserved a mother who could tell the difference between love and obligation. I took a slow breath. "I'm ready." Grandpa Walter nodded. But he didn't begin with a dramatic revelation. He began with a question. "Emily, have you ever wondered why every family emergency somehow became your responsibility?" I almost smiled. I figured I was just the reliable one. "No," he said gently. "You became the reliable one because everyone else discovered they could rely on you without ever paying the price for it." The room fell silent again. He reached into the leather briefcase he'd carried into the hospital and pulled out a plain manila envelope. It wasn't thick. just a handful of folded papers. I've been collecting these for years, he said. Not because I wanted to expose anyone, but because I kept hoping your parents would finally tell you the truth. Themselves. My heartbeat quickened. He slid the first paper toward me. It was a photocopy of a check. The signature at the bottom belonged to my father. The amount was nearly $20,000. The memo line read, "For Ethan's business investment." I frowned. Ethan never owned a business. He didn't. Grandpa replied. He wanted to open one. I stared at the paper. What happened to the money? Grandpa sighed. He spent most of it in 6 months. Another document appeared, then another. Vacation deposits, credit card balances, car payments, private loans, everyone connected to Ethan, everyone paid by my parents. I looked up. I don't understand. You will. He leaned back in his chair. Every time they rescued Ethan, they ran out of money. I waited, and every time they ran out, he continued, they came to you. A chill ran through my body. I thought back over the past decade, the unexpected home repairs, the medical bills, the tax problems, the short-term loans that somehow were never repaid. Every request had sounded believable. Individually, none of them seemed suspicious. Together, they formed a pattern. Grandpa watched. The realization spread across my face. I don't believe your father planned it that way, he said quietly. Your mother convinced herself she was protecting Ethan until he got his life together. But he never had to, exactly, because every safety net they gave him was quietly woven with threads taken from you. I closed my eyes. For years I'd believed I was helping my parents survive difficult times. Instead, I'd been financing my brother's refusal to become responsible. The realization hurt more than the broken ribs, not because of the money, because every sacrifice I'd made had come with a story. Your father is worried. We're just a little short this month. Family helps family. None of those statements had been complete lies. But none of them had been the complete truth either. Grandpa slowly placed the envelope back inside the briefcase. I haven't shown you the worst part yet. I looked at him. What could possibly be worse than this? His expression grew heavy. The money wasn't the real reason I drove here today. He rested one hand on the old briefcase. Emily, there's one document in here that explains why your mother left your baby alone the night of your accident, and once you read it, there won't be any going back. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed the same question. What document could possibly explain why a mother would refuse to help her own daughter after a car accident? The next morning, I was finally discharged. Ryan drove us home while Noah slept peacefully in the back seat, completely unaware that his parents' world had shifted forever in less than 48 hours. Grandpa followed us in his pickup. When we reached the house, Ryan carried Noah inside while Grandpa asked if we could talk privately. We sat on the back porch where the autumn air was cool enough to sting my bruised lungs every time I inhaled. For a long moment, he simply looked out across the backyard. Finally, he opened the briefcase. This, he said, removing a sealed envelope, was written by your grandmother about 6 months before she passed away. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat, careful, every word written with intention. Emily, it began, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to tell you everything while I was alive. I swallowed hard. Your mother has always loved you. But somewhere along the way she began depending on you more than loving you. The words hit me like another collision. Grandma continued, every time you succeeded, she saw another problem you could solve instead of another reason to be proud of you. Every time Ethan failed, she saw another excuse to protect him. I tried to stop it many times. I failed. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, tears were quietly rolling down my face, not loud sobbing, just silent tears for the childhood. I suddenly understood. Grandpa handed me a tissue. Your grandmother blamed herself. She shouldn't have. She believed she should have spoken up sooner. I carefully folded the letter. So, that's why Mom wouldn't come. Grandpa slowly shook his head. No, he reached into the briefcase again. He placed a printed email on the table. It had been sent just 2 days before my accident. The sender was my mother. The recipient was Ethan. My eyes moved across the screen. Don't worry about the credit card debt. Emily will help us again if she has to. She always does. Below that was Ethan's reply. What if she finally says no? Then came my mother's response. One sentence that erased every excuse I'd spent years making for her. She won't. She needs us to need her. I couldn't breathe. Not because of my injured lung, because I realized my kindness had never been misunderstood. It had been expected, planned for, counted on. My mother hadn't believed I would help because she trusted me. She believed I would help because she thought she knew exactly how to control me. Grandpa quietly closed the briefcase. I debated showing you those emails. Why now? I whispered. He looked toward the living room window where Ryan was rocking Noah to sleep. Because she already left your son alone once. His voice grew firmer than I'd ever heard it. And if nobody finally tells the truth, she'll spend the rest of your life teaching him that your sacrifices belong to everyone except yourself. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't thinking about recovering. I wasn't thinking about my parents. I wasn't even thinking about the money. I was thinking about Sunday, because my mother had already invited the entire family over to celebrate my return home. She thought it would be another family gathering where everyone accepted her version of events. She had no idea that this time, Grandpa was bringing the briefcase, and I was finally done protecting the people who had never protected me. Sunday arrived colder than anyone expected. The bruises along my ribs had already turned yellow around the edges, but every step still reminded me that my body hadn't fully healed. Ryan carried Noah inside, while I followed slowly, my wrist still wrapped in a brace. The moment we walked through my parents' front door, my mother smiled as if nothing had happened. There they are, she announced loudly enough for every relative to hear. Our little family is finally together again. It was a performance. I could see it now. She hugged my aunts. She kissed Noah's forehead. She even asked if I was feeling better, as though she'd spent the week worried about me instead of ignoring my calls. The dining room was full. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even Ethan had shown up, laughing at something on his phone as if life hadn't changed at all. Grandpa Walter arrived 5 minutes later. He walked in quietly with the same worn leather briefcase tucked beneath his arm. No one paid much attention to it. At least not yet. Dinner started with small talk, but it didn't take long before my mother steered the conversation exactly where she wanted. She sighed dramatically. I just wish families didn't keep score. We should forgive each other. Several relatives nodded. Then she looked directly at me. I know you've been emotional since the accident, sweetheart. We all understand. The room became silent. She expected me to apologize. She expected me to restart the financial help. She expected history to repeat itself. Instead, I stood. Ryan squeezed my hand once before letting go. I agree, I said calmly. We shouldn't keep score. A few people smiled, thinking the argument was over. Then I continued, but we should tell the truth. I reached into my bag and placed several copies of the documents Grandpa had given me on the dining table. One by one, the room filled with the soft sound of paper sliding across wood. No speeches, I said, just read. Confused expressions quickly turned into silence. My Aunt Lisa adjusted her glasses. My uncle stopped halfway through a sip of coffee. Ethan picked up the email and read it twice before looking at my mother. Mom's smile disappeared. Emily, she laughed nervously. What exactly are you trying to prove? I met her eyes. I'm proving that my kindness wasn't appreciated. It was expected. She started talking over me. Those papers don't explain, Grandpa interrupted for the first time. They explain enough. Every head turned toward him. He opened the leather briefcase and removed one final folder. I've stayed quiet for years because I hoped this family would fix itself. It didn't. He laid the folder beside the others. Everything Emily has shown you is true. I verified every document myself. Nobody spoke. The room felt smaller. He looked at my parents. You raised one child to believe responsibility was love. Then you raised the other to believe responsibility belonged to someone else. Neither of them denied it. Ethan slowly lowered the papers into his lap. I didn't know, he whispered. I believed him. He'd spent years living inside the same lie, just from the other side. My mother finally broke the silence. So what happens now? I looked toward Ryan, then toward Noah sleeping peacefully in his carrier. For the first time in years, the answer wasn't complicated. Now, I stopped carrying a weight that was never mine. I picked up my son. Ryan collected our diaper bag. Grandpa quietly closed the briefcase. As we walked toward the front door, my father stood. His voice shook. I'm sorry. They were the first honest words I'd heard from him in years. I nodded. I hope one day you mean them enough to change. Then we stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt something far more valuable, free. Months later, life looked different. Ryan. And I focused on raising Noah instead of rescuing grown adults. Ethan got a steady job and slowly began rebuilding his own life. My parents had to face the consequences of their choices without expecting me to solve them. Some relationships healed, others never did. And I finally understood something my grandmother had tried to teach me all along. Love isn't measured by how much you sacrifice, it's measured by how people treat you when you need them the most. The night of my accident showed me exactly who my family was. But walking away with my husband, my son, and my grandfather showed me something even more important. Sometimes losing the role you've always played is the first step toward finally becoming the person you were meant to be.